In a world where power defines reality and diplomacy decides the future, there are moments, rare moments, when everything slows down and the fate of nations rests on a single table. April 2026. Islamabad, a city known for its calm, its order, its quiet presence on the global stage, suddenly became the center of international attention. Because behind closed doors, something extraordinary was unfolding. The Islamabad Talks, a high-stakes negotiation between two nations whose rivalry has shaped decades of global tension, the United States and Iran. For years, their relationship has been defined by conflict. Sanctions that shook economies, warnings that echoed across continents, moments where the world stood still, waiting for what might come next. And yet, despite all of this, they chose to talk. This was not just another diplomatic meeting. This was a test of patience, of power, of strategy, and of how far each side was willing to go without stepping back. At the center of it all stood the United States, a nation whose influence extends far beyond its borders, whose decisions shape global markets, whose military presence defines security across regions. But this was not about showing power through force. This was about controlled strength, strategic clarity, and unwavering resolve. The US entered Islamabad with a mission that was simple, yet non-negotiable. Iran must never acquire nuclear weapons. To some, this may sound like policy, but in reality, this is a line that defines the global order. Because a nuclear-armed Iran could trigger a chain reaction across the Middle East. More weapons, more instability, more uncertainty, and the United States was not willing to let that happen. Hour after hour, American negotiators remained focused, every word calculated, every response measured. No emotional reactions, no unnecessary compromises. This is what global leadership looks like. Not loud, not reckless, but precise. Even when reports suggested that a deal was close, even when the pressure to agree increased, the United States did not move away from its core demands. Because true power is not just about reaching agreements, it's about knowing which agreements should never be made. Across the table, Iran stood just as firm, driven by its own priorities, its own identity, its own sense of independence. For Iran, this was not just negotiation, it was resistance. Resistance against pressure, against limitations, against external control. And so, the room remained locked in tension. Silences became heavier than words. Pauses carried more meaning than statements. At times, it seemed like a breakthrough was inevitable. A historic agreement, just moments away. But diplomacy is not about moments. It's about margins. And in this case, those margins proved too wide. Inches away. That's how close both sides came. But sometimes, inches are the hardest distance to close. And then, there was Pakistan. Not the loudest voice in the room. Not the most powerful military. But perhaps, the most important presence. Because without Pakistan, this conversation may have never happened. Pakistan stepped in, not as a competitor, but as a connector. Hosting such talks requires more than space. It requires trust from both sides, neutrality that is respected, stability that is reliable, and a diplomatic environment where even enemies feel secure enough to speak. Pakistan delivered all of it, from ensuring top-level security to managing international pressure, from facilitating communication to maintaining balance. Pakistan played its role with precision. It did not try to dominate the narrative. It did not seek the spotlight. Instead, it focused on what truly mattered: making dialogue possible. And that is a different kind of power. Because in a world full of conflict, the ability to bring rivals together is rare and valuable. Even global observers acknowledged that Pakistan's efforts were serious, consistent, and meaningful. For a moment, Islamabad became more than just a city. It became a symbol of possibility, of restraint, of what diplomacy can achieve, even in the most difficult circumstances. But not all stories end in agreement. After hours of intense negotiation, the talks concluded without a final deal. No handshake that changed history. No announcement that reshaped the future. Just silence and uncertainty. Soon after, tensions began to rise once again. The United States, ready to explore stronger measures, economic pressure, strategic control, even influence over critical global routes like the Strait of Hormuz. A lifeline for the world's energy supply. Because when diplomacy pauses, power re-enters the equation. But here's what truly matters. The talks happened. Despite decades of hostility, despite deep mistrust, despite global pressure, they sat down, they talked, they tried. And that alone changes the narrative. Because diplomacy is not defined by success alone. It is defined by effort, by persistence, by the willingness to try, even when failure seems likely. And so, the story of the Islamabad talks is still unfinished. Another round may come. Another opportunity may rise. Another moment where the world once again watches closely. And when that moment arrives, history will remember the strength of the United States. Firm, focused, and unyielding. The resilience of Iran. Steady, determined, and defiant. And Pakistan, the silent force in the background. The bridge between two opposites. The country that proved that even in a divided world, connection is still possible. Because in the end, the greatest victories are not always won on battlefields. Sometimes, they are built in rooms where people choose to talk instead of fight. If you want to understand how history is unfolding before our eyes, don't miss what comes next. Revisit Xfinity Evolution for deeper insights and powerful stories. Stay informed, stay curious, and join us again on Xfinity Evolution, where the world's biggest events come into focus.